we're asked to do a very deep thing, which isn't to change ourselves, but to give ourselves over fully to this life, says Jack Kornfield in episode 286 of Heart Wisdom, The Great Ocean of Change, Letting Go into What Is. According to the archives, this Dharma Talk first took place in 1993 and is a counterpart to last week's episode, Bowing to What Is. This one continues to explore the three characteristics of impermanence, suffering, and selflessness, as Jack shares stories of the Tibetan Buddhas Avalokitesvara and the creation of green Tara and white Tara, as well as getting into the Dharma of a duck. Yes, it's true. Life is ever-changing, and we are like a duck, floating ever so gently and gracefully on this always changing ocean of life. This poem that Jack shares, I don't know why, but it really hits home. As you look out wherever you are, you can see everything's always changing. As you look at your body, it looks a lot different than it did 10, 15 years ago, I'm sure. The political landscape's always changing. The landscape of our ideas is always changing. The waves are always coming. And our awareness, says Jack, is like a duck resting on the ocean, this great ocean of change. The housekeeping I have for this week is maybe the most exciting housekeeping I've had to give. Jack has just released a completely free new online course on standing up for compassion. This is a free course and resource for navigating uncertain times with Jack Kornfield. It is full of amazing meditations, striking wisdom for how we can find our ground no matter what's going on, how we can begin to tip the scales of this world to compassion during this time of the great turning. And Jack dives in to how we can imagine a better world through this birthing process we find ourselves in. This is a beautiful guide containing writings, journal reflections, videos, guided meditations, instructions for walking meditation, and so much more. This is completely free and at jackkornfield.com. Stand Up for Compassion, a free course and resource for navigating uncertain times with Jack Kornfield. I highly recommend you dive into this. You get lifetime access, so you can jump into the teachings whenever it feels apropos to your life and the current world situation. Hope to see you there. Otherwise, I hope you enjoy this striking episode of Heart Wisdom, The Great Ocean of Change, Letting Go into What Is. May you be happy and healthy. May you be safe and protected. May you float gracefully like a buoyant duck atop the great ocean of change. And may you let go beautifully into what is. Namaste.
It's said in the Tibetan tradition that the great Bodhisattva or Buddha, Avalokitesvara, the Buddha of compassion, practiced for so many eons and mahakalpas in order to free all beings from suffering. And he went to every realm, the heaven and the human and the hungry ghosts and the hell realms, and taught every being and freed them all. And then when he turned back to look, after doing that, he saw that the realms that had just been emptied were again filling with new beings. And 2 tears rolled down his cheeks. And 1 tear turned into white Tara, 1 tear turned into green Tara. Tara is the Tibetan goddess of compassion, of infinite mercy. to see that even though we do all we can, still there is this sorrow. And the truth is that as your practice deepens, it's not that there's less suffering, but often there's more, because your capacity to see that and your compassion deepens. That's the first characteristic. The second is impermanence. We see how much it changes. Our breath is long and short and deep and fast, and then it stops and it's tight and it releases and we control it and we don't. And it does everything. And the more closely we feel into our body, everywhere we pay attention, it begins to change. Pulsing, throbbing, tingling, moving, vibrating, hurting, opening. And then we feel our feelings, and there's joy and loss and judgment and happiness and sadness. And it changes day to day, hour to hour, moment to moment. We think, well, it's not supposed to be this way. Aren't we supposed to get somewhere in meditation? Now we are ready to look at something pretty special. It is a duck riding the ocean 100 feet beyond the surf as he cuddles in the swells. There's a big heaving in the Atlantic today, and he is part of it. He can rest while the Atlantic heaves because he rests in the ocean. Probably he doesn't know how large the ocean is, and neither do you, but he realizes it. And what does he do, I ask you? He sits down in it. He reposes in the immediate as if it were infinity, which it is. That is religion, and the duck has it. How about you? So we sit and it changes, just like the Milky Way every 10 million years revolves around the center of the galaxy. It's like we're on this Ferris wheel ride. Our star is 2/3 of the way out, and we go around every 10 million years. And our body changes. And we try to grasp it and control it and get out of change every way we can. And it doesn't work. There's a story of W.C. Fields. Did I tell that to you? He was a noted atheist, didn't believe in any of that stuff. But there he was lying on his deathbed in the hospital, probably owing a lot of money, whatever. And a friend came in to visit him and saw him reading the Bible, which he quickly closed and shut and stuffed under his bed. And he said to him, "I thought you were an atheist. Did I see you reading the Bible?" W.C. Fields looked up and he said, "Just looking for loopholes." We think that somehow if we do it right, it won't change. There won't be loss. There won't be change in our life. Seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking, perceiving in all our senses, the more we pay attention, the more we sense ourselves as a river of life. Everything changes. Our perspective changes. There's a famous, one day we like it, another day the same thing we liked we hate. Try eating any of your favorite food for 6 meals in a row. Go ahead. See what happens. It's a famous psychological experiment in which 3 buckets are filled, one with ice water, one in the middle with neutral room temperature water, and one with hot water that you can just barely stand. And then the graduate student subject, as usual, is brought in and asked to plunge their hands into the 2 buckets on either side. The hot bucket, just barely can hold it, and the ice cold bucket. And leave their hand in for 30 seconds or so, about as long as they can. Then they pull their hands out and they place them both in the bucket in the middle, room temperature water. And their facial expression goes kind of strange and their eyes cross because the hand that was in the hot water feels that bucket to be really cold. And the hand that was in the ice water right next to it in the same water feels that bucket to be very hot. Their hands are in the same place. And yet one is telling them that it's cold and the other is telling them that it's hot. Which is true? Suzuki Roshi, when asked to sum up all the teachings of Buddhism in a simple way, said, I can do it in 3 words. Not always so. How's that? Not always so. Whatever it is, not always so. And to bow to impermanence is just to honor that this is true. Things we love disappear, things we hate also disappear. And they come back, in some way. There's a story of an old couple who went to visit some friends in California who lived near a great big racing track. They'd never had anything to do with that, but they went to watch and they got a little bit interested. So the man said, well, I'm going to go to the track and do some betting. It just looks kind of exciting. And his wife said, have a nice day, dear, whatever. And he went, he took $2 just to make a $2 bet, see how he went. Well, he bet on one of the kind of long shot ponies, the 100-to-1 odds, and it won. And he got quite a bit of money, and then he bet another long shot, and he went through the day. At one point, he had $53,000. Really very intuitive. He said, one more bet before I go home. Put it on this last dog, as it were, this last pony, and it came in third. Pretty good, but he was betting for it to win. Lost all the money. Went back home, finally walked back, and his wife said, well, how was it at the track? Did you have a nice day? How did you do? And he said, I lost the $2. That's really how it is, you start with something and that's it. So to bow to impermanence is to honor moment after moment, day after day, that this is true. No matter how we are or think, this is what's true. And then the third characteristic is selflessness, emptiness, the openness, the unfixability of ourself. We're not separate. You know the story of Mullah Nasruddin when he goes into the bank to cash a check and they say, could you please identify yourself? So he pulls out of his pocket a small mirror, looks in and says, yup, that's me, all right. We are who we think we are, is what we believe about ourselves. But it's really a mirage, a dream. And we don't have much control over who we are. We just have these thoughts, I'm this kind of person or that kind of person, And the more that we pay attention, the more we sit here and feel it breathes itself. Our thoughts come of their own. Do you control your thoughts? Well, do you control your feelings? Well, do you control your body? Is it yours then, if you can't tell it what to do? Say, all right, I'm not going to grow old. Try that. Does it listen? I'm not going to think. Does it listen? It owns itself. It has its own self-nature. There is no one who possesses it. It also arises out of nowhere. Where do those thoughts come from? The void. Where do they go to? Disappear. How about your moods? Feeling happy or sad, grief, joy. Comes for a while, then where does it go? Back into the void. Back with George Washington and the Holy Roman Empire and the pyramids and all of that. Things appear, 1980, 1990, 1992. For a little while they do their dance and then gone. Think, well, this is me. It must be. I control myself. It's my body and mind. Here's the way Gandhi put it. He said at one point, I have only 3 enemies, said Gandhi. My favorite enemy, the one most easily influenced for the better, is the entire British Empire. My second enemy, the Indian people, I find far more difficult. If you've never been to India, you don't understand that so deeply. But my most formidable opponent is a man named Mohandas K. Gandhi. With him, I seem to have very little influence at all. So we don't own it. We don't possess it. It's one way now, and tomorrow it's another way, and it's not ours. And what we're asked to do Just to open, to see that that's true, that our life is an ever-changing process. And certainly like a garden, we can plant certain seeds, we can nourish or water beautiful things within us and hope that they will grow. But that's about the best. It's not ours. You don't own this body, you rent it for a while. Your mind even less. You can't grasp it or fix it. And the more deep meditation, deeply you open, the more you see how ungraspable it is. So then, how do we respond to this truth of suffering, of impermanence, of selflessness? One response is despair. I'm afraid, it's terrible, it's overwhelming, to retreat from it. Or another is to look for something really good, to find something pleasurable or excellent or fine within us, and then see if we can hold it. So that's the thing that happens. You sit and things are difficult, and either you try to resist it and hope it will go away, or something terrific comes and you go, oh boy, now let's see, how did I get that? I sat that way, I had a drink of water before I sat, I breathed like this, maybe I can get it to stay a little longer. And it's like holding your breath, you know? But what happens after a while? It gets really tiring, trying to make anything come back over and over again. So we can't retreat from it because it will follow us. It's like Nasruddin said. At one point he was with some friends and he said, I caused a whole tribe of bloodthirsty Bedouins to run one time. And his friend said, how did you do that? And he said, it was simple. I ran and they ran after me. If we run away, it will go with us. If we try to hold on to it, we really can't hold anything. We just tie ourselves in knots. What we are asked to do is to bow to what is here just now, to honor the truth of it. As Thoreau said, when a dog runs at you, whistle for him. What's here is what's here. You understand? Okay? This is my meditation. This is it. You want to know where the meditation goes? This is it. It's impermanent, it's suffering, it's unpossessible, it's selfless. And you are asked to have a quality that Alan Watts called to be like a courteous audience, to say, yes, this is so, this is how it is. If you can do that, and you can with practice, that's what we do, you discover that each of these qualities, each of these characteristics has within it a gift. As we open to each one, there is something new that is born. Out of suffering arises the grace of compassion. The Tibetans pray for it. They say in their practice, please grant me enough suffering so that my heart may truly open for compassion. Imagine that. Imagine asking for it. It's like Rumi, where he says, a certain preacher prays long and with enthusiasm for thieves and muggers that attack people on the street. He doesn't pray for the good, but only for these. Why is this? Because they've done me such generous favors. Every time I turn back toward the things they want, I run into them. They beat me and leave me broken in the road, and I understand again that what they want is not what I want. They keep me on the spiritual path. That is why I pray for them. Those that make you return for whatever reason to the Spirit, be grateful to them. Worry about the others who give you delicious comforts that keep you from your prayer. So in suffering, there comes the gift of awakening the heart of compassion. It's like Karmapa, this great Tibetan Lama who visited IMS at one point, one of the great teachers, who does this black hat ceremony in which he has this crown given to him a dozen lifetimes ago by the Emperor of China. And when he puts this crown on and takes his crystal rosary and chants Om Mani Padme Hum as we did on New Year's Eve. He becomes the Buddha of infinite compassion. And normally he was like this 50-year-old baby, just this happy child. But when he put that on, his face became just filled with the most deep sorrow that I'd ever seen. His eyes would tear, and it was as if he really let himself look at the sorrow of every being in the world and prayed for their benefit. And then after the ceremony was over, he would put the crown back away and the crystal rosary away, and again turn into this big joyful baby. Somehow in the suffering, as we bow to it, our heart can open to connect with all beings. I did a retreat with another Tibetan Lama recently, Ken MacLeod. We were doing the practice of compassion where you breathe in the sorrows of the world to your heart and breathe out compassion. We'll do something like that as the retreat goes on in the metta. And then he was describing graphically the worst kinds of suffering and saying, breathe that in, breathe out compassion. And it was very hard because it was so graphic and so painful. And you could see I was struggling. You could see everybody else there was struggling with this too. And then at one moment he said, I know this is difficult, but if you could breathe in the suffering of the world and change the pain to compassion, if you could take away the sorrows of the world by breathing it in, who among you wouldn't do it? And it was an amazing moment because he knew that no matter how hard it was, he would do it. And that's the willingness to bear witness, like Joanna spoke of, to what is true that gives rise to this beauty in us. It is like Ram Dass talked about when he was teaching service in Oakland last year, this whole long series of classes on service and working. There was a woman there who worked in Oakland, and she said every day she would go to work and there was a homeless person on the street. And this particular man she would give money to, 50 cents a day. She'd been doing it for months. They had kind of a relationship because she would see him and he'd wait for her. And as the class went on and Ram Dass talked to her, talked to everyone, one point she got up and she said, I learned something. She said, I realized though I give him money, I never really look at him. And I was trying to figure out, she said, why it is that I don't look at him. And then it came to me in the meditation in this class. And I realized that if ever I really looked into his eyes, within that very week, he would be living in my living room, in my house. So the gift that comes from our bowing to suffering is our connectedness and our compassion when we face it with every being that lives. In impermanence, there's also a gift. And that is that no matter how good it is, or no matter how bad it is, it will change. Because it is infinitely, amazingly creative and abundant. And we think we know how it is for a moment, and then something else happens. Michelle, who teaches here, used to be a school teacher for little kids. And she said one day she took her first grade class out because they were really interested in death. They saw dead bugs and dead animals, and kids, they're not afraid of it. They want to find out what did I get myself born into? They're curious. So they went out in the woods and they collected everything they could that was dead. Leaves, old dying mushrooms, old pieces of trees, shells from snails that had died, parts of skeletons, bones that they found. And they made a big pile of all this stuff. And the kids were really excited to look for dead stuff. So they sat around with all this dead stuff and looked at how the forest was dying, the leaves and all this. And then she asked them, what did they think about dying and death? She said, what do you think would happen if there wasn't death? And their little brains started to think about it and said, well, there'd be more and more trees and more things, and it would get fuller and fuller and fuller, and there'd be no room for us. So that as everything dies, it makes room for something new to be born. I want to be thoroughly used up when I die, said George Bernard Shaw, for the harder I work, the more I live. I rejoice in life for its own sake. Life is no brief candle to me. It is a sort of splendid torch which I've got hold of for the moment, and I want to make it burn as brightly as possible before handing it on to the next generation. There's this amazing fountain of creativity and surprise. Every million years, there's all these new species that are born. Like God's saying, all right, let's try another kind of animal this shape, or another kind of creature, or another kinds of flowers. Incredible possibilities. When I worked in the Cambodian refugee camps, I saw this. There are these people in these little tiny huts, 6 feet long by 4 feet wide, on a dry, barren plain in the rice paddies, who had lost members of their family, destruction of their villages. Very, very difficult. And each hut had outside the door a little bit of land before the next hut. There was a path to the door, and then there was a square about 1 yard wide by half a yard. That was it. And these people had been in these huts for 6 months, 4 months. In most of those little squares was a garden. And they would go in the hot sun with a bamboo pole and walk all the way across the camp to this pit well that was dug by a bulldozer, and wait in a half-hour-long line in the blazing sun and walk way down to the bottom of the pit well and get 2 buckets of water, walk back up. The whole thing probably took an hour, and bring their buckets back and water a little squash plant and a bean plant and a few things. And you could see that even in the midst of the bleakness of that place, there is a force in every being of life that wants to be born, that wants renewal. A fountain of life that is also who we are. Read you a passage. Talks about this in a very different way. Comes from Kurt Vonnegut. We have all these different notions of how to solve the problems of the world and what their causes are. Well, in this particular scene in one of his novels, the man sitting there late at night watching an old World War II movie, and somehow the movie gets put on backwards. And this is what he sees. American planes full of holes and wounded men and corpses taking off backwards from an airfield in England. Over France, a few German fighter planes fly up at them backwards, suck bullets and shell fragments from the planes and crewmen. They did the same for wrecked American bombers on the ground, and these planes flew backwards up to join the formation. Then the formation flew backwards over a German city that was in flames. The bombers opened their bomb bay doors, exerted miraculous magnetism which shrunk the fires, gathered them into cylindrical steel containers, and lifted the containers into the bellies of the planes. The containers were then stored neatly in racks, but there were still a few wounded Americans, though, and some of the bombers were in bad repair. Over France, German fighters came up again and made everything and everybody as good as new. When the bombers got back to their base, the steel cylinders were taken from the racks and shipped back to the United States, where factories were operating day and night, dismantling the cylinders, separating the dangerous contents into minerals. Touchingly, it was mainly women who did this work. The minerals were then shipped to specialists in remote areas. It was their business to put them back into the ground, to hide them cleverly so they would never hurt anybody ever again. For the raindrop, joy is in entering the river. Unbearable pain becomes its own cure. Travel far enough into sorrow, and tears turn into sighing. When, after heavy rain, the storm clouds disperse, is it not that they've wept themselves clear to the end? In impermanence is the possibility of new birth, creativity, a whole new visioning of life. And finally, in selflessness, in not possessing, the wisdom of insecurity, in being nothing, says Kalu Rinpoche, we are everything. As we empty of ourselves, we feel more and more deeply our connection with all things. Rodney tells the story in his hospice work of this man who was close to death. 2 children there to care for him, and all of a sudden the phone rang. And they answered it, and it turned out that this man's younger brother died in a car accident. So they're talking, should we tell him or shouldn't we? He's on his deathbed, he's near death. Maybe we should tell him it's his brother. Maybe we shouldn't. Let him have a peaceful death and not bother him. He's already got so much to deal with. Finally, they decided not to tell him. They went in the room with hospice worker as well. Good morning, Father. See him very, very sick, lying there. Finally, he looked at them and he said, don't you have something to tell me? They said, what do you mean? He said, about my brother who died. They said, well, how do you know? And he said, oh, I've been talking to him. And then he called them to his bedside and finished his business with them, his children, and soon thereafter died. How could that be? You all have heard many stories like that. You know how it could be. Because being nothing, we are everything. We are interconnected. And so what we seek, the perfection, the wholeness, the awakening of the Buddha, comes when we are here. The mystery of life is not a problem to solve, but a reality to experience. Light and dark and joy and sorrow are what it is. And when you experience it, when you open, this tremendous joy comes. This is from Alice Walker. She said, one day I was sitting quiet and feeling like a motherless child, which I was. You all know that one. And then it came to me, that feeling of being a part of everything, not separate at all. And I knew that if I cut a tree, my arm would bleed. And I laughed and I cried and I ran all around the house. I just knew what it was. In fact, when it happens, you just can't miss it. There is a kind of opening that can come to us. What we're asked to do here is a very deep thing, which isn't to change ourselves, but to give ourselves to our life. To practice with continuity and care, bowing, opening. It's really like being in labor. If you've ever had a child or been there for childbirth, it's a birth of your life, a birth of yourself, over and over, letting go to what is. First, individually, St. John of the Cross says, if you wish to be sure of the road that you tread upon, you must close your eyes and walk in the dark. Just letting yourself be there, moment after moment, not knowing where you're going, because it really doesn't matter. Wherever you're going, it's going to change, and it will have joys and sorrows, and you won't possess it. And it will ask your deep compassion. To do this is to discover a perfection that's not the perfection of the world, but the perfection of your love. And all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. It's to awaken the great wisdom and heart of the Buddha in every circumstance. To practice in this way, and you're asked to do it, to really give yourself sincerely, it only shines when you surrender, when you do this moment after moment after moment. Then you come to freedom. Shantideva says, as a blind person feels when they find a pearl in a dustbin, so I am amazed by the miracle of Buddha nature that arises in the darkness of my own consciousness. It is the nectar of immortality that delivers us from death, the treasure that lifts us above poverty into the wealth of giving to life, the tree that gives shade to us when we roam about scorched in the desert, the bridge that takes us across the stormy river of life, the cool moon of compassion that calms our mind when it's agitated, the sun that dispels darkness, the butter made from the milk of kindness by churning it with the Dharma. This is a feast of joy to which you all are invited.